just south of the bustling center of San Antonio, Texas, lies an isolated intersection where the heavy silence feels unnatural. The crossing at Villamain Road and Shane Road looks completely ordinary during the daylight hours. But as darkness falls, a chilling atmosphere descends upon the asphalt, and the rusted metal tracks that cut across the landscape. Locals know this desolate stretch of road all too well, and many refuse to drive near it after midnight. It is a place where history and nightmare blur together into a terrifying reality. Visitors who dare to stop their vehicles right on the railroad tracks often experience something that defies all logical or scientific explanation. The air grows freezing cold, even during the suffocating heat of the deep Texas summer. A strange mist sometimes rolls over the crushed gravel and clings to the wooden railroad ties. Those who sit inside their stalled automobiles report hearing the faint sounds of distant whispers and the soft padding of small footsteps approaching them. To understand the terrifying phenomenon happening here, one must look back into the dark history of San Antonio. The legend begins in the late 1930s during a grim winter evening. The surrounding landscape was mostly undeveloped farmland, dotted with twisting oak trees and small wooden houses that offered little protection from the bitter wind. Elias Vance, a Caucasian man in his 50s, wearing a faded brown flat cap and a gray wool jacket, drove the local school bus. He was a quiet man who took his duty seriously. Every afternoon, he navigated the winding dirt roads to return the exhausted children to their rural homes before the sun completely set. Elias Vance, a Caucasian man in his 50s, wearing a faded brown flat cap and a gray wool jacket, knew every bump and curve of Villamain Road. But on this particular December evening, a dense white fog crept up from the nearby San Antonio River. The thick vapor swallowed the headlights and reduced visibility to nothing. The heavy yellow bus rattled along the uneven path, filled with the restless energy of 10 young students. They chatted and laughed, completely unaware of the looming tragedy waiting for them just down the road. Elias gripped the large steering wheel with tense hands, struggling to see the familiar landmarks through the blinding natural veil. As they approached the dreaded railroad, crossing, the engine suddenly sputtered and let out a violent mechanical cough. Elias pumped the gas pedal, but the heavy vehicle lurched forward and died directly over the steel tracks. Panic began to take root in his chest as he turned the ignition key again and again without any success. The bus sat paralyzed in the dead center of the crossing. The children grew quiet, sensing the rising anxiety radiating from their usually calm driver. Elias Vance, a Caucasian man in his 50s, wearing a faded brown flat cap and a gray wool jacket, opened the manual door and stepped out into the freezing night air. He moved to the front of the bus and lifted the heavy metal hood, hoping to find an easily fixable problem. The cold wind howled around him, masking any sounds from the surrounding darkness. The fog was so thick that he could barely see the terrified faces of the children pressing against the foggy glass windows. Suddenly, a deep vibration traveled up through the soles of his worn leather boots. The steel tracks beneath the vehicle began to hum with a terrifying metallic resonance. Elias slammed the hood down and spun around as a blinding white light pierced through the heavy mist. A massive freight train was hurtling toward the trapped bus. The deafening shriek of the train whistle shattered the quiet night. Elias screamed for the children to evacuate, but the heavy folding door had jammed shut from the awkward angle of the tracks. The small students pounded their fists against the reinforced glass, crying out for help as the unstoppable steel behemoth bore down upon them. Elias ran to the side of the bus, desperately searching for a heavy rock or branch to smash the emergency exit window. The blinding headlight of the locomotive cast long, distorted shadows across the desolate crossing. The vibrating ground signaled that death was only mere seconds away, and there was absolutely nothing he could do. The impact sounded like an exploding bomb, tearing through the quiet Texas countryside. The massive train obliterated the wooden and metal frame of the school bus, sending twisted debris flying into the night. The horrific sound of screeching metal and shattering glass was followed by a silence so absolute and profound that it felt completely unnatural. When the local authorities finally arrived at the scene, the devastation was beyond human comprehension. The twisted wreckage of the school bus was scattered for hundreds of yards along the bloodstained tracks. Elias Vance, a Caucasian man in his 50s, wearing a faded brown flat cap and a gray wool jacket, perished alongside all 10 children. The city of San Antonio mourned the devastating loss of innocence for many years. A heavy blanket of sorrow settled over the intersection of Villamain Road and Shane Road, forever marking it as a cursed location. The railroad company eventually upgraded the crossing, but the spiritual stain of that horrific night could never be washed away. Decades passed, and the dirt road was eventually paved over with black asphalt. Modern vehicles replaced the vintage automobiles of the 1930s, but the crossing retained its eerie reputation. Soon, strange reports began to surface from late-night drivers who traveled through the exact spot where the horrific train accident had occurred so many years ago. People claimed that if you parked your automobile directly on the tracks and shifted the transmission into neutral, something completely impossible would happen. The vehicle would begin to slowly roll forward, all by itself. It would move steadily up the slight incline, completely defying the laws of gravity. until it cleared the dangerous steel railroad tracks. Skeptics argued that it was merely an optical illusion caused by the surrounding landscape. They claimed the road was actually angled downward despite appearing to go uphill. But the brave thrill seekers who visited the crossing soon discovered another terrifying layer to the paranormal mystery that completely destroyed any logical or scientific explanation for the movement. The ghost hunters started sprinkling a fine layer of white baby powder across the back bumpers of their automobiles before driving onto the tracks. They would shift into neutral weight in the darkness and feel their cars moving forward. When they finally pulled over to inspect the powdery surface, they found something that froze their blood. Clearly pressed into the white dust were the distinct shapes of tiny human hands. The handprints were entirely too small to belong to any adult. They were the perfect size of elementary school students, the spectral children from the tragic 1930s bus crash, were pushing the modern vehicles to safety across the haunted railroad tracks. Countless witnesses have documented these tiny prints under the glow of a flashlight. Some prints show 5 clear fingers, while others look like small palms sliding against the metal. The ghostly children remain trapped in an endless loop of tragedy, desperately trying to save others from the exact same violent fate that claimed their own lives. The atmosphere at the crossing changes dramatically when the unseen children arrive to help. The temperature inside the vehicle plummets so rapidly that drivers can see their own breath puffing into the air. The heavy feeling of deep sorrow floods the minds of the passengers, making some burst into tears without understanding why they are crying. A young woman named Sarah visited the crossing on a dare during a moonless autumn night. She stopped her sedan on the tracks, turned off the headlights, and waited in the suffocating darkness. After 10 terrifying minutes, she felt a sudden jolt from behind, as if dozens of small, unseen forces had slammed into her trunk. Sarah gripped the steering wheel in sheer terror as her heavy car began to roll upward. The vehicle moved with incredible speed, clearing the tracks, just as a distant train whistle echoed through the empty fields. She pulled over, trembling uncontrollably, and rushed to the back of her car with a bright flashlight in her hand. The baby powder on her trunk was completely disturbed. Wiped across the fine white dust were over 20 separate sets of tiny fingerprints pointing forward. She also noticed that the metal of her bumper was freezing cold to the touch. The unexplainable experience left her so traumatized that she never drove near the southern roads again. Another brave investigator named Marcus brought advanced audio recording equipment to the tracks, hoping to capture electronic voice phenomena. He placed his sensitive microphones near the rusted warning signs and sat quietly in his idling truck. The night was entirely silent, with without even the rustle of wind through the skeletal branches of the nearby oak trees. When Marcus reviewed the audio files later, that evening the hairs on the back of his neck stood up straight. Buried beneath the ambient static of the recording were the unmistakable sounds of children giggling. A young boy with a southern drawl clearly whispered, telling Marcus that he needed to move out of the dangerous way. These encounters are not isolated incidents meant to scare tourists. The haunted crossing has become a permanent fixture in San Antonio folklore, drawing believers from across the nation. Families pass down the dark history, ensuring that the memory of the tragic victims remains alive, even as the surrounding neighborhoods continue to expand and modernize around them. Some locals claim that the entity of Elias Vance, a Caucasian man in his 50s, wearing a faded brown flat cap and a gray wool jacket, also roams the tracks. Witnesses report seeing a tall shadow figure standing by the warning lights, frantically waving his arms. He appears just before a train passes through the intersection. The agonizing guilt of failing to save his precious students anchors the driver to the earthly realm. His spirit manifests during nights when the fog is particularly thick, mirroring the exact weather conditions of his demise. He walks along the crushed stones, desperately searching for the scattered pieces of a school bus that no longer exists. One terrified motorist reported seeing the phantom driver staring directly into her passenger window. She described his face as pale and sorrowful, with eyes completely hollowed out by grief. Before she could scream, the ghostly figure dissolved into the rising mist, leaving behind nothing but the lingering smell of burning rubber and old engine oil. People who live near Villamain Road often hear strange noises when no trains are scheduled to run. The horrifying screech of tearing metal and the desperate cries of young voices frequently echo through the darkness. The local police department regularly receives panicked phone calls about a terrible collision, only to find the intersection completely empty upon arrival. A group of teenagers once tried to mock the legend by parking on the tracks and refusing to put their car in neutral. They blasted loud music and laughed at the dark history of the sacred site. Suddenly, their car radio turned to pure static, and the heavy doors locked themselves, trapping the frantic youths inside. The violent shaking started from the back bumper, terrifying the trapped teenagers. Invisible fists pounded furiously against the trunk and the rear windows. The frantic assault continued until the driver finally managed to jam the transmission into neutral. Immediately, the angry pounding stopped, and the vehicle was gently pushed forward until it cleared the railroad crossing. Upon inspection, their vehicle was covered in angry smears rather than the usual perfect handprints. The protective spirits were furious at the blatant disrespect shown to their eternal suffering. The children want to help those in genuine danger, but they fiercely punish anyone who treats their tragic resting place like a cheap carnival attraction for amusement. The phenomenon has attracted numerous paranormal television shows and independent researchers. All of them bring specialized equipment, hoping to debunk the enduring mystery of the San Antonio ghost tracks. Yet time after time, they capture unexplainable temperature, drops electromagnetic spikes, and visual anomalies that force them to reconsider everything they know about the afterlife and spirits. In recent years, the local authorities have tried to discourage visitors from stopping on the active tracks. It remains incredibly dangerous to park any vehicle near a modern train route. New warning signs reflect the harsh reality of the intersection. But the allure of the supernatural mystery continues to draw curious minds into the dangerous darkness. Urban developers even proposed altering the road entirely to eliminate the crossing once and for all. However, the local community fiercely opposed the plan, wanting to preserve the historical memory of the lost children. The intersection remains a strange monument to a forgotten tragedy, where the veil between the living and the dead is terrifyingly thin. It is incredibly rare to find a haunting born completely out of an act of pure benevolence. Most ghost stories involve angry spirits seeking violent revenge or malicious entities wanting to cause harm. But the children of the San Antonio tracks only want to protect the living from experiencing the horrifying agony of a train collision. Their tiny spectral hands press against cold steel night after night, pushing heavy machines out of harm's way. They do not rest, and they do not move on to a higher plane of existence. Their eternal duty ties them to the asphalt, where their innocent lives were brutally cut short during that terrible winter storm long ago. A grieving mother who had recently lost her own child visited the tracks seeking some form of comfort. She parked her truck, dusted the bumper, and closed her eyes. She felt the gentle push, and when she checked the powder, she found one singular perfect handprint right in the center. She felt overwhelming peace wash over her. She believed that the spirit children recognized her deep maternal sorrow and reached out to comfort her broken heart. The tracks are not just a place of fear, but also a site of profound spiritual connection. The boundary of mortality fades away, leaving only the raw emotional truth of love loss and eternal protection in the dark. Yet the atmosphere can quickly turn sinister if someone approaches the crossing with dark intentions. A man attempting to steal copper wire from the nearby signal boxes reported being physically shoved to the ground by unseen forces. He claimed small, invisible hands grabbed his ankles and dragged him away from the tracks until he fled in terror. The phantom guardians fiercely protect their territory from anyone looking to cause destruction. They serve as the eternal watchmen of Villamain Road, standing against the darkness that surrounds the isolated intersection. The crossing belongs to them entirely, and any mortal who steps onto the gravel must submit to the unseen authority of the tragic, ghostly children forever. As midnight approaches, the shadows deepen around the warning lights. The distant rumble of a modern freight train vibrates through the earth, signaling another approach. If you stand quietly near the edge of the road, you might see the wispy mist forming into small shapes. They gather along the tracks, waiting for a helpless vehicle to stall. The legend of the San Antonio Railroad crossing will never fade as long as vehicles continue to travel down the lonely southern roads. The physical evidence left behind in the white powder is impossible to ignore. Each tiny handprint serves as a haunting reminder of the fragile nature of human life and the enduring power of spirits. Elias Vance, a Caucasian man in his 50s, wearing a faded brown flat cap and a gray wool jacket, continues his endless vigil. He watches over his spectral flock, ensuring they complete their protective mission every single night. The driver and his students are bound together by trauma, forming an unbreakable spectral family trapped in time forever. Skeptics will always try to find a logical reason for the rolling vehicles and the mysterious handprints. They will talk about gravity hills and dust settling in weird patterns. But those who have felt the freezing cold interior of their cars and heard the whispers know the undeniable truth of what resides at that dark, desolate crossing. The veil separating the physical world from the spiritual realm is permanently torn at this exact location. The trauma of the 1930s crash ripped a hole in reality that allows the past to constantly interact with the present. The ghost children are not merely an urban legend, but a tangible force of nature acting upon the living. If you ever find yourself driving through southern Texas late at night and approach a solitary railroad crossing, pay very close attention to your surroundings. Do not mock the silence, and do not test the spirits for mere entertainment. The unseen forces command immense power, and they demand absolute respect from anyone entering their haunted, tragic domain. The phantom children of San Antonio wait in the shadows, listening for the terrible sound of a stalling engine. Their tiny hands are always ready to push you to safety, whether you believe in their existence or not. The haunting reminds us all that some souls simply refuse to leave until their final desperate mission is complete.